One World Championship, the San Marino Grand Prix, and the final qualifying session, which is about to begin. And it's about to begin in what is no longer torrential rain, but still nevertheless very wet. Now that means that this qualifying session is going to be very tricky indeed. John Watson, as always, is beside me in our commentary cubbyhole above the pits. John, the track here is slippery enough in the dry. There's not a great deal of traction. This could indeed be a very interesting session.
Yes, indeed, Richard. Imola is one of the less grippy surfaces. The Imola circuit has got a low grip surface. It's always a problem in the dry. And of course, this morning, and as we see right now, the circuit is wet. So anybody who goes out is going to slip and slide all the way around. Now, what I hope will happen is that the conditions will remain as they are. There's that fine Irish mist that's been falling over Italy. How it got here, I don't know. But that has stopped. There isn't any rain falling at the present time, but the track is saturated. He instantly went across to the right-hand side of the track. Now, that is not the normal line. The reason he does that is because the exit of that chicane, by staying on the left, there is less grip. So he went straight across to the right, to the clean part of the track, to try and find some bite. But look at the amount of water coming off the tyres from Capelli's car. There's a little river running across just as they come into the braking into the Tossa corner.
Well, qualifying this second session looking like something of a lottery for people at the back of the grid who must improve. There are 4 drivers here, and that includes both the drivers. The new footwork which Alex Caffey is driving, Michele Alboreto, still injured from his practice accident in the old footwork. They have to do something if they're going to join in the race on Sunday, but in this weather, as John says, it looks unlikely that they could do a great deal.
Well, look at those conditions. That really is very, very wet indeed, and that's done at the Acqua Minerale. There the track is much, much wetter than it is here in front of the pits. Now, we've just seen Eric van der Poel go out. He was one of the pre-qualifiers from Friday morning's pre-qualification. He's now just about to go onto the circuit, really just to have an exploratory look. There's nothing to be gained from being out there. Most of the teams had extensive running this morning in the very, very wet conditions, so they've got an idea of what it takes to run the car in the wet if the race on Sunday happens to be wet.
Well, as you know, rain is something of a great leveller. This is a horsepower circuit. This is a circuit which substantially benefits cars with greater amounts of horsepower, except in these conditions where those differences between 600 and 700 horsepower are evened out somewhat, and that is the kind of thing which may benefit Van der Poel, for example.
Richard, in all honesty, it's nice to think it. I know you're a mate of Eric van der Poel, but if it's wet, Eric van der Poel, I have to say, is unlikely to win the race. There must be uncertainty that Ayrton Senna will yet again start from pole position, and in fact he reckons he's had pole here virtually every time he's raced, except for his first year when he was in the Tolman, and in fact he didn't qualify. There was a problem during that race, but Ayrton Senna, unquestionably the man that will be on pole for Sunday's Grand Prix. The different little factions that exist within that team. Of course, Alan Prost and Cesare Fiorio, they have this seemingly insatiable battle as to who should run the team, and the fact that Alan Prost says very vocally that there is no leadership within Ferrari. Ideally, what Alan Prost would like is Ron Dennis to take over the running of Ferrari, because he said he is the only man he knows who knows how to run a team properly, and undoubtedly if Ron Dennis ever had that luxury of being the owner, or let's say the guest team manager for a season, there's no question in my mind that he could turn that team on its head and have it winning races quickly and consistently.
Well, as you say, Alan Prost might like it. I suspect that Ron Dennis might like it also. We're watching the Lotus of Mika Hakkinen, a young driver fresh to Formula One in Phoenix, who showed up well, although he had a pretty lurid outing in Phoenix. He did very well in Brazil and is settling quite comfortably into Formula One. But this is a car which lacks horsepower as well. It's right on the bubble on this grid, and presumably Mika Hakkinen is really feeling the difference now on a power circuit.
Yes, in Phoenix the power disadvantage wasn't so noticeable, but here at Imola his V8 Judd is giving away probably 60 horsepower, and on a circuit like Imola that's much, much too much. Now, even though the conditions are bad, we've got a very wet track, the advantage that the Honda engine has here with Ayrton Senna over the Judd engine that Mika Hakkinen has will still tell, because we've got this very long straight. You've still got to get down it as quickly as possible. An extra 60 horsepower, well, that's going to tell at the end of the straight.
As you were saying, though, when we were talking yesterday evening, and I'm sure that everybody at home thinks that after the practice and qualifying sessions, our evenings are conducted in expensive restaurants with fine wines, but of course we have very long and protracted meetings about our work here, perhaps with the addition of a certain amount of brain tonic. But we were talking about this question of horsepower last night. It's not just the figure, is it? It's the way it is made available in the engine, the way it comes on when you open that throttle, and the way the driver can access that power.
Yes, again, it comes back to what we were talking about, throttle mechanisms and the ability to open the throttle. And Ayrton Senna there climbing uphill. That's a section of circuit that unquestionably will help Senna, because it is uphill, and that horsepower, the ability to get it to the ground, will assist him in being able to lap quicker than somebody with somewhat less horsepower. And currently Mika Häkkinen is in fact the quickest man on the circuit. This is Senna's first flying lap. Häkkinen has got a 1 minute 47.992. I'll just be curious to see how fast Senna goes on his first timed lap on Saturday afternoon.
Well, Senna, remember, the provisional pole sitter and the man that we have all put our money on to keep that pole position, because no one would bet that 121 could be bettered in these conditions, although you can see the beginnings of the wheel tracks drying out on the track in certain places.
There are a couple of places. Look, you see in that part of the circuit, that's the Ravazza. Senna really struggling for grip. And trying to get power down as early as possible is no different in the rain as it is to the dry. You want to maximise the traction. That's the ability of the rear wheels to put the power to the ground without sliding, without breaking away. Coming through this chicane, look, you see, very, very tentative on the throttle, waiting until he gets the car, pointing in a straight line before he nails the throttle. Well, in fact, Senna has actually just nicked the quickest wet weather time on Saturday afternoon away from Mika Häkkinen by 0.6 of a second. Now, that's his first lap out. In part,
something of a legend with Tyrrell. He bounced a couple of cars in Brazil. He had a small and grassy excursion this morning in the untimed session, but nevertheless he was 6th fastest yesterday in the dry, and that is good. Tyrrell were more or less on the pace in Phoenix. They missed a beat in Brazil, and they seem to have it back together again now.
Yes, it's taken about 3 races for the Tyrrell team to adopt to the different weights and heights and lengths of this Honda V10 engine. And of course, not only is it the physical size of the engine, it's the engine characteristic. A lot more horsepower, and that horsepower does make a lot of difference to the car. To regain all those fine properties that Tyrrell had last year has taken the team 3 years. Of course, they've also got a new driver in Stefano Molina. He's got to learn to live with the team, to grow into the team. They've got to understand him. This is a marriage, it's a partnership. It just doesn't happen by magic overnight.
Well, Formula One, as we all know, is something of an alchemist's art. It's the people who have rationalised that and turned it closer into a computer program who seem to have the best of it at the moment. And again, we're thinking about McLaren, obviously, and the days when the verve of Ferrari was sufficient to carry them to the front of the grid and to the checkered flag seem to be over.
Yes, Ferrari in particular have been a team that have reluctantly, and it's only in the days, I would say, when John Barnard was in charge of the engineering at Ferrari that a truly scientific approach was adopted. Alan Prost out having a run in his car. Prost has just gone out. He's done one slow lap. This is his first timed lap. But Ferrari for very many years believed that the heart of a racing car was in that V12 engine. They've always, well, nearly always throughout the history, had V12 engines, and most of their successes come with a V12 engine. But they always reluctantly accepted that you have to make a chassis work to make the engine work. There's no point having all these gobs of horsepower if you can't get it to the road.
Again, the question of drivability, but this 641 as it ended last year was coming on to be a well-balanced and well-rounded race car. The 642 that we see before us still, though, has some rough edges. It does not look as good at the beginning of this season as it did at the end of last.
The team, I think, got slightly caught out by some of the regulation changes. The front wing and the rear wing had to be altered the regulations, effectively tried to reduce the amount of downforce that these cars were potentially capable of producing, and I think that did slightly catch them out. Also, they had some engine changes to the car, and one of the changes that they've got here, in fact, is they've gone to a larger air intake for the engine. They found that by going to that larger intake, they've got better engine performance. Now, the trade-off against that is that, of course, they get a little bit less air going to the rear wing, but on balance, they've found a balance that enables them to be actually quicker overall. The car is slightly less insensitive than it was in Phoenix and in Brazil.
Dry line that we were hoping for in this second qualifying session hasn't really appeared. We're watching Nigel Mansell in the Renault Williams in the middle of his first fast lap in these conditions, if you can call it fast, John.
Well, Senna's certainly been very impressive in the wet. Nigel Mansell just feeling his way around. He's just at the top of the circuit. This is the highest point of the circuit, dropping down to the chicane where we saw him yesterday having to take a shortcut. He came up very quickly behind Fabrizio Barbazza. He's the driver replacing Stefan Johansson in the AGS, and this is now into the Acqua Minerale, an uphill right-hand corner leading up to another one of these chicanes at the Imola circuit.
Now, you describe Imola as a power circuit, but it does have a lot of slow corners, doesn't it? It's not a high-speed circuit in the way that Silverstone is.
Well, it's still pretty high speed, Richard. It's still in the middle 135 or so miles per hour bracket, but it's got lots of straights, then lots of very tight chicanes and relatively low-speed corners, and that's why I say it is a power circuit, because while you have to slow down to a low speed, you've got to pick that speed back up again, and that's where horsepower, that's where pure grunt really helps. So people like Honda, Ferrari, the Renault, the Ford HB engine, and even some of the lesser engines, the Lamborghini V12 engine, because it's not at the front, it doesn't mean that it's not a very powerful engine. You've got the V10 Elmore engine, you've got the V10 Judd engine. They're all powerful engines, but it is the marrying of those engines to the package that really is the reason why we see cars like the Williams here of Mansell or Patrese or Senna or Berger. They're at the front because the success is in marrying those two elements together better than the others.
Well, Mansell using the horsepower of that car to a 155.6, which is not as quick as Ayrton Senna's best, which was about 146, I think, or 144. 143 Ayrton Senna has done now, but Mansell's still going, and this perhaps looking a little bit quicker now that he's found where the puddles are and where the best dry bits are.
Yes, you just have to go out and a couple of exploratory laps, get a feel for the track surface. You just have to find where the standing water is, how to maximize the grip the tires have, these wet weather tires. You've got to find the best line around the circuit in wet weather conditions, and in wet weather conditions the best line is not necessarily the shortest point through the corner. It may be a wider arc, but there may be a lot more grip available to the driver, to the tires, by doing so. We've seen, in fact, a number of drivers, as they come down to this part of the circuit, this is coming down under the bridge into the Ravazza corner. The first part, you don't have a lot of choice. It's very slippery there. You can see Mansell's car squirming around, but the second part, he's running a little bit wider. Well, he, in fact, didn't do it, contrary to what we expected. But Patrese, who was behind him on the previous lap, was much wider on the exit of that corner. He's doing that because he feels more secure out there. He senses there's more grip there, so that's what you've got to do.
Now, we're looking at someone searching for the best wet weather line, which, as you say, may not be the best dry weather line, and Mansell improving quite noticeably there to 147, so he obviously has found somewhere. What about wet weather tyres, though? Do they...
Drier than this would become unstable and would begin to disintegrate.
One of the other things that Pirelli have is an intermediate tyre, which may perhaps help the Pirelli runners. Now, we saw yesterday in the dry that Nelson Piquet and Roberto Moreno with the new Benetton Ford had perhaps not come on as strongly as they would have liked, and it may well be that an intermediate tyre on these conditions could help them to lift themselves a little.
Well, it's not going to change their grid position. All it would do would be at a given point in this session, maybe elevate them a couple of places. Again, talking to Goodyear yesterday, this question of intermediate tyres, even taking a normal dry weather slick tyre and putting grooves into it, They believe, in fact, that it is really a pointless exercise because either it's wet enough to run wets or it's dry enough to run dries. And if the conditions are getting dry, then it is better to run on those very soft compound dry weather tyres because you will gain more grip from those than having an intermediate tyre in a slightly harder compound with channels, hand-grooved channels in that tyre. So from Goodyear's point of view, there's no need for an intermediate tyre. But look at John O'Lacey there, coming out of that chicane, nailing the throttle, the car squirming under acceleration. He runs very wide coming down there. He's looking for grip. He's running very wide in the first part of the Ravazza because he senses the outside of the corners more grip. Not as wide as we've seen other people go through the second part of the corner. But John O'Lacey trying like mad to get those 690 horsepower, or whatever the Ferrari engine is supposed to have in qualifying trim, down onto the ground. And he's decided, well, I've done my little run. I had a look at the circuit. It did 31 minutes, 29.947 on his first lap out. Of course, all that time was spent in the pits. He did his one exploratory lap. Not a lot of traction from the Ferrari on that lap. You saw the car sliding around a lot. That in part is, of course, John O'Lacey's style. He's trying to pick up the throttle so early in the corner, whereas Alan Prost, who we're looking at now, because he's that much more experienced, that more canny, will probably be a little bit more, we've called him a caresser before. Well, that's the best conditions you can imagine to see Alan Prost caressing the throttle pedal.
That's the second time we have seen a Lotus in the gravel during the course of today, and it's the same one as went off this morning during the course of the untimed session.
Well, that's Julian Bailey. He's gone off coming into the Ravazza. He's probably just simply locked up her front brake, lost the steering. The car has slid on into the sand trap. No damage to the car, no damage to Bailey either, of course. And in reality, it will not make any difference to the outcome. Julian Bailey is currently 26th on the grid. He is in the race. He will now be wishing that the conditions do not improve, but in reality, I suspect there's no chance of anybody altering the good position. The track is not drying quickly enough. Although it's not raining, the ambient temperature is still quite low, and you really need a bit of wind, a higher ambient, and 30 cars on the racetrack to make any effect on the conditions.
Well, let's just remind ourselves, as we are beyond the halfway point in this session, that the man at the moment on pole is Ayrton Senna, Patrese second, Alain Prost third, Nigel Mansell fourth, Gerhard Berger fifth, and Stefano Modena sixth. And despite what we're seeing here and the gradual appearance of a dry line, that, as John Watson so rightly says, is almost certain to stay the same.
Yes, the track surface, you can see that. Two tracks, but those are the lines that the drivers will take in the corner. But there's just too much water on the track. A lot of rain fell overnight. We had a lot of heavy rain this morning before the Saturday morning on-time session. Then we had rain between the two sessions. This circuit is just plain saturated.
Well, it is a characteristic of the surface that even after the cars have cleared the surface water off, and that dry line, it's visible, but it's not really dry. It's still wet, and as the cars go over it, that actually can bring water to the surface and keep it wet for some time. And that's where the wind is needed to blow dry it effectively.
Yeah, well, take your hairdryer out, Richard, and give it a shot. I mean, sometimes people would say that if you got all 30 drivers out and allowed them to walk around the circuit and just talk amongst themselves, there's so much hot air talk that the circuit would dry out even quicker.
Well, there's a certain veracity in what you say, I suspect, but we're watching two rivals who we're going to see, I think, again and again, slogging it out during the course of this year as we have in previous years.
Car, and I'm sure in the course of this lap, if we get back to them, as they come across the line to finish the lap, Ayrton Senna will be right on the gearbox of Alain Prost's Ferrari.
On board now with Nigel Mansell, and this is a driver's eye view of a circuit, and it does look so different, doesn't it?
Yes, by the way, he's actually coming into the pits here. He hasn't decided to just find a new line around the circuit. This is Mansell coming into the pits. He's had a run. He's down now into the high 1 minute 43s. So Mansell improving over the first one he had only a few minutes ago.
Those times, looking at the monitor, anybody down in below 145 is doing well in these conditions, and it's a handful of drivers only.
Well, Mansell has done a time which, in fact, just has a 0.3 of a second slower than this man, Ayrton Senna. But, of course, Senna set his time about 10 minutes ago. The track conditions probably were wetter then. The grip certainly would have been different. It doesn't always follow, though. In fact, as the circuit is drying out, when you go from a lot of loose water on the track to these conditions, the grip, in fact, can sometimes deteriorate, because instead of having the deep water in which that deep tread block can actually sort of grip or lock into, you're getting into conditions now which are just at the point of being neither one thing or the other. It's not quite dry enough to think about coming in and trying a set of drive where there's slick tires. It isn't really this weekend. He will attempt to apply that same philosophy to all other 29 competitors here on Saturday afternoon, and of course 26 in the race on Sunday afternoon. He's a master at that, and of course it's a part of a driver's armory. It's a fair and legitimate part of a driver's armory, and if you can intimidate your competitors and make them believe that you are superior under every condition, under every circumstance, you've got an advantage. So therefore, take advantage of it.
Well, of course, it makes Ayrton Senna and the rest of the drivers in Formula One very dangerous men to play poker with, doesn't it?
Well, Alan Prost's a good poker player, but that's cards I'm talking about. He has allowed at times Ayrton Senna to out-psych him, and I think we saw a reverting back, and I don't want to talk about it again because it's been so talked about, but Japan last year, there was an element of out-psyching taking place before that race started, and that in part could have accounted for that particular accident.
Well, Ayrton Senna 143.7. It's Imola. It's round 3 of the Formula One World Championship. It's raining. Join us again after this break. Welcome back to Imola. It's still a wet circuit, as Jean Alesi has just discovered very nearly to his cost. We are heading down towards the close of this second qualifying session, and Alesi had the Ferrari all locked up for a fraction of a second there.
Yes, and look at him through the Rovazza. He's got the car, touches the throttle, the back end steps out, and really that's not going to help him in any respect at all. He's not using the car, I would say, productively. He's fighting with himself, he's fighting with the car. He wants to go fast, he's trying too hard in these conditions. What he'd be best advised to do is, in fact, select a gear higher than the one he's actually using, probably drop the RPM by maybe 2,000 and short shift. In other words, just change gear below the maximum power of the engine in any given gear. That will make his progress a lot smoother, and therefore the times will come. He'll be much quicker.
I suspect, however, that for all that, Jean Alesi is doing one thing to great effect, and that is endearing himself to the Tifosi, who do approve mightily of the elbow-waving technique.
Yes, the Italian fans do love a challenger, a trier, and Jean Alesi has won the hearts of the Italians, but Gerhard Berger must have done something to stir the Italian emotion. He's just recorded the fastest lap so far. He is now at a 1 minute 41.530. So Gerhard Berger is the quickest man on the racetrack so far Saturday afternoon. But Jean Alesi, I mean, actually doing what he's doing, it's quite a lot of fun to do it, but of course it can get caught out. And just letting the back of that car ride up over the curb, it could just snap back the other way. Oops, and look at Ayrton Senna. Now he's found a shortcut, or Gerhard Berger, I should say, found a shortcut. He's not meant to do that. He's meant to go through the chicane. Gerhard Berger trying very hard indeed. Seeing the back end of a Ferrari, of course, is a catalyst for any McLaren driver. He'll want to get up to that gearbox as quickly as possible. Look, let's see Berger now. We've just got Alesi coming through the chicane. Suddenly, to the right, Gerhard Berger launches himself across the grass. Locked a brake, I suspect, coming into the chicane. Said, prudence is the better part of valor. I'm going to go across the track. There's not a lot of damage to the car. He'll come into the pits. Hopefully the pits didn't see that. He'll be able to say, oh, something happened, somebody put me wide. But anyway, we'll see.
Gerhard Berger, though, on something of a flyer, as you say, because he has just recorded 141.53, which is, I think, 2 seconds quicker, is it, than Ayrton Senna? Certainly, he was flying round there. Yes, it is indeed, getting on for 2 seconds faster than Ayrton Senna. And coming into the pits now, Gerhard Berger being scrutineered, measuring the height of the rear wing, and not actually checking for damage, but making sure that that car complies with the regulations. It's a random check which is performed on cars coming off the track, and
carbon fibre tube suffered fractures, suffered delamination, which is a problem with carbon fibre as a material. It ultimately broke in the early part of the race in '89. He had that huge accident. Now there was a situation where Berger may have been advised to say to the team, well, I'm riding the curbs, I did put my front wing end plates over, just check it out. It's small things like that that can save a great deal of harm to a driver.
Well, as we saw on yesterday's programme, Gerhard Berger, nothing if not cranked now after Phoenix. When we said, you've had some bad luck, he said, no, I was just bad in Phoenix. I think if there was a lesson to be learned there, Gerhard Berger in relaxed mode this weekend at Imola has definitely learned it. And we are looking at someone else who is not just relaxed, but walking about the paddock about a foot off the ground. Riccardo Patrese is just full of himself this year.
Well, we've seen Nigel Mansell at Silverstone virtually walking on water. Whatever he does at Silverstone, it's supercharged Nige. And I don't know what we've got here. We've got maybe Turbo Patrese or something, because Riccardo Patrese is walking around with the same sense of ease, confidence that we see with Nigel Mansell at Silverstone. Riccardo Patrese currently on the front row alongside Ayrton Senna. Patrese just has done a 1:49, so that's obviously not of any significance, but on the second lap now in this particular run, taking a slightly different line coming into the Tossa hairpin. He stayed much more over to the right. He went through some standing water there. I don't know why he would choose to do that. But now accelerating uphill, fourth gear into fifth gear. Very quick at the top. The car gets light as it comes over that crest. You've got to settle the car down again before you take fourth gear. The double left-hand corner that follows, and then the plunge down into the chicane, all the way down into second gear. Of course, the Williams Renault with this semi-automatic gearbox. The gear change is on the steering wheel, two levers, one either side of the steering wheel, similar to the Ferrari system that we've seen for the last 2 years. One of the benefits of that type of gear change is, of course, that the driver is able to keep his hands on the steering wheel throughout the course of a race or a practice run like this. And taken for granted that drivers have to change gear, but by keeping both hands on the wheel, you ought to have more control all the time.
Well, that said, an automatic or semi-automatic gearbox should be slightly smoother on a continual basis than a manual gear change. It should be able to continually effect nice, smooth, easy changes.
That's the theory of it. The one disadvantage that I see of that sort of gear change is that I like to have the control over the gear I want to select. And with a gearbox like this, you've got to go down sequentially through the gears. From sixth gear, you've got to go all the way down, fifth, fourth, third, into second. They will use the gear change as a means of controlling the speed, the de-acceleration of the car.
Well, we've got just about 10 minutes of this second qualifying session left to go, and as we suspected at the beginning, very little has changed. We're looking at the Ferrari circulating there, but the quickest man on the circuit during the course of this session so far has been Gerhard Berger, who has recorded 1:41.53. It's an academic point, really.
Yes, it is, but of course, if the race is run in these conditions, you've got to push the car to the limits in these conditions. Jean Alesi, who we're looking at right now, knows nothing else than to run on the limit. He is, in fact, just set the second quickest time of this wet Saturday afternoon session. This time just 0.4 slower than that set by Gerhard Berger. And Jean Alesi now climbing back uphill out of the Acqua Minerale. He certainly is a spectacular young guy. You get accustomed to watching Alan Prost driving the car in a very smooth. Look at that, just too much horsepower. The rear tire is just unable to cope with the surge of power. Again, that's probably running the engine right up to the limit of its RPM, where the maximum power of these engines is now developed. It's important in dry conditions with these engines to keep them in that rev band, that narrow rev band, as much as possible. But in wet weather conditions, it's not so important. In fact, you generally get better lap times from not going to the extreme limit, as we've seen Jean Alesi attempting. Well, he's decided, I've done enough. I had my one quick look, and he comes back into the pits.
There is the position from Friday's first qualifying session. Provisional
start on wet weather tyres in conditions like this. Oh, you take an enormous punt and go for a set of dry tyres. I don't know. Those are the conditions that team managers earn their money, and they've got to take a gamble. Right now, the track really is too wet. Run on dry weather tyres, but with 26 cars running at one time, if the ambient temperature was somewhere maybe in the high 50s, low 60s, it's got to be worth a gamble for one of your two cars to go that route.
Well, weather and rainy conditions, always something of a lottery. It's pleasing to know that Italian weather forecasting is no more accurate than that back home in England. It's going to be dry tomorrow, probably, is the best we've got at the moment. And the best we've got at the moment, as we say, is 1:41 compared to 1:21, which Senna set yesterday in the dry. So 20 seconds a lap difference between the fastest men yesterday and today, and that really is a considerable amount.
Yes, of course, if you translate that into a race time, of course the race distance is the same, but we're going to have a much longer race if we have conditions like this, and of course pit stops will become de rigueur. In fact, I wonder if one of those two will know they're both in fact on wet weather tyres. I just wondered maybe had Williams chosen to put Mansell out just for a little look-see on a set of slicks. Nothing to lose by doing it at this stage, and it might be the right game plan for Sunday should we have conditions as we have them right now.
Ayrton Senna we're looking at now. At the moment, Berger is quicker than Senna by just a few points. Both running 1:41s, but Senna, I beg your pardon, by 2/10. It's 1:43 and 1:41. Senna hasn't improved on that. So Senna, I think we may be about to see some fireworks from. It's late in the session. He likes to be quickest in each one, and this may well be Ayrton Senna's opportunity to show us, and I'll cross our fingers on that, his complete mastery of car control.
Again, the conditions have changed. Senna sat in the pits for something like 10 minutes. He's back out onto the track. And here we see he's got a Tyrrell ahead of him. And one of the new Benettons, the B191 Benetton. That's a car, the first John Barnard designed Benetton. And they've been having a lot of little niggly problems with this car. And one of the main areas has been the gear change. The selector mechanism in that gear change is not as good as it's necessary. The drivers have been missing gears quite a lot. In fact, Piquet this morning, I think, broke the record for the number of revs recorded on the Ford HB. I think he got into 6 figures, it was so high. And that was attributable basically to the inaccuracy of the gearbox. And he probably got second gear instead of fourth gear. Thing went to astronomical revs, and that meant another engine change for the Benetton team. That's a problem they're unable to deal with here at Imola, but I would imagine by the time we go to Monte Carlo in 2 weeks' time, that problem will be cured, and we may begin to see the true potential of this John Barnard, the Benetton B191.
Well, switching to a Ferrari every time it appears on the track here in Italy. This is Jean Alesi. Ayrton Senna chasing Stefano Modena was where we left him, and there didn't seem to be a lot of difference in the ability of those two cars to get power onto the tarmac under this rain.
No, it is very, very fine, the difference between the two cars, the two drivers. Gerhard Berger, in the meantime, is continuing to consolidate his quickest wet weather time here on Saturday afternoon. And he's just recorded a 1 minute 41.210. But this man, Jean Alesi, look at that. Can't resist getting the back end of the car stepping in. I think he's sitting there doing this purely for himself. He's just going out, and obviously there's an important purpose in it, but you can allow yourself a little bit of an indulgence in these conditions as long as you don't have the car come back at the end in the back of a tow truck.
So we suspect that inside his helmet, Jean Alesi has a smirk on his face. Just getting very dangerously close to the curbs after what you were saying about the change in grip there. He was very nearly back wheel mounted up on that curb, and he comes very close to it again.
Yeah, so Jean is using all the racetrack and the bits, the extra bits, the curbing. I maintain that going on the curbs in the wet is a disadvantage, but of course Jean Alesi just knows one way, and that's flat out, and if there's space there to use, he'll try and use it. The fact that it may not have the grip that he has on the racetrack seems incidental to him. There we see that almost youthful face of Jean Alesi, but definitely a star of the moment and a major star of the future. Can he match Ayrton Senna's time? Can he match Gerhard Berger's time? Well, he's about 2 seconds off. And Gerhard Berger, the car just in front of John O'Leary, has now broken into the 40-second bracket with a 1:40.322. So unquestionably, Berger is the quickest man on the racetrack. And he looks quick. He looked quick coming in there. You could see the speed he was carrying. The confidence, Berger's confidence is building. Since Brazil, at third place, seems to have helped him begin to put together the career that sort of last year took a major knock. His confidence was severely jolted, and of course being the teammate of Ayrton Senna made him reappraise the whole concept of being a Grand Prix driver. Senna, the most committed man in Formula One history as far as I'm concerned. Now Gerhard Berger beginning to show the flair he had before he joined McLaren. He's always had speed. He's learning to apply himself, to dedicate himself. So Berger currently the quickest man on this very wet racetrack.
Well, Ayrton Senna, of course, is still out there. We're travelling at the moment with Nigel Mansell.
No, we're with Nelson Piquet. This is the first time we've been in car with Nelson Piquet in this new Benetton. And you can see the shape of the car, quite a different... No, it's not, isn't it?
Well, that was an interesting cut, wasn't it? And I think we'll never know the answer to that one, John.
I reckon that was still Nelson Piquet because it was his helmet, but there he suddenly cut to Nigel Mansell. I'm going to stick with my guns and say we were. Yes, we are in car with Nigel Mansell. I was right the first time.
Well, Nigel Mansell cutting through the chicane there. And to be fair, the session now coming to its close, and Mansell's opportunity to improve, and he hasn't been very quick in the wet, really now gone and over, although he is making this dying gasp. Watching the clock there. John, you know exactly where he is on the circuit and where he should be for a fast lap.
Well, at this point of the circuit, he's exactly 16 seconds slower than the time that we saw yesterday. The quickest time, look at that, John O'Leary. You don't have to look at the helmet to know who that one is.
Mansell still piling it on and waiting to see a clock on him. But Nigel Mansell's effort, no matter how good, is not going to change the quality.
Seine Zeit dürfte sicher niemals an die, doch 1:41,87. Aber das Training ist jetzt genau seit 40 Sekunden vorbei, also ändert sich nichts. Kann ich Ihnen sagen, also wie es morgen aussehen wird, nachdem Sie wissen, dass die beiden Porsches nicht...
This is the official grid. Ayrton Senna on pole, Riccardo Patrese alongside him on the front row. Second row, Prost and Mansell, and then on to row 3. Berger and Stefano Modena, 6th fastest yesterday, and a fine effort for Tyrrell. The next row, Jean Alesi and Gianni Morbidelli. Prediction from John Watson, myself, in San Marino. It's goodbye. Don't forget to join us again tomorrow.
Thanks, Richard. Well, we're looking forward to that race, and you'll be able to follow it, of course, live tomorrow here on Eurosport in Sunday Alive. Richard Nichols and John Watson at the Imola racetrack.